Hey, Emily.
Hi, Jane.
How are you?
I'm doing great today. How are you, Jane?
I'm doing well, and I just want to welcome everyone to this week's Appy Hour. Today's special, we have part two of Let Your Data Do the Talking. And we're joined by Emily Cline. As you can see, we're very excited to have her. And so sit back, enjoy the show. And Emily, what are you drinking today?
This week, I have got myself a nice tea. The fall weather is coming in, and so I've got a pumpkin spice rooibos tea, which I know sounds maybe a little weird, but it kind of reminds me of like a spicy chai tea.
Okay, that does sound good. I wish I had tea. I just have water today, but I put it in a fancy wine glass, so
We can
be
cheers
more in
to
the spirit.
that.
um, do you want to jump on in and talk about what we will be doing today?
Sure. Yeah. So we are in part two of Let Your Data Do the Talking. We're in this theme of data literacy, and so excited to be talking about my passion, which is data storytelling. So last week we talked about getting to know your data, so knowing who your audience is, how to interview them, ask the right questions, getting to know the context of our data, what's the story behind our data, and then getting to know our data. So what is our data telling us before we even ask questions of it or apply what our audience has asked? We are just exploring our data and seeing what's there. And so, Jane, I think everyone can check us out on YouTube, right? From our last episode.
Yeah, definitely. Our past episodes on YouTube, along with all of our past episodes of Appy Hour, so you can check that out on YouTube. And also, if you want to learn more, we have released a really great guide about data literacy, and you can find it on our website. There it is, data literacy, how to make data every employee's friend. You can download this guide. It's very helpful. But today we'll also just verbalize and talk about how data literacy and how to make data your friend.
Yeah. So this week we're going to be talking about telling the story, Jane. So last week we didn't even really get into really creating any meaningful visuals with our data. So we're going to talk about how to choose the right visual, how to remove clutter from our charts, and to draw our audience's focus to the message that we're trying to implement within our visualizations. So this week we're going to get really in depth about individual charts. We're not going to be putting it together. In a future episode of Appy Hour, we're going to go into implementing. So our last our third part in this series is going to be talking about actually making that dashboard, pulling things together, putting in some design elements into our data visualizations, and what tools and resources we have available to us. So so excited to be here in part two, and let's just dive into telling the story.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right. So step one, choose a visual. Choosing a visual is really not as complicated as it sounds, or maybe even looks based on the picture on this screen. I really see this as a two-step process. First, we need to identify the data relationship that we are trying to portray. And then second, we need to choose a chart type that fits that data relationship. So what I'm showing on the screen here, this is an image from the Financial Times. They released this. It's called their visual vocabulary infographic. And what it does is it walks us through the different types of chart relationships and the types of visualizations that effectively get that information across to us. So for example, if you were looking at a change over time, which is right here in the center, these are all the different chart types, and we can go really, really in detail and see. Let me pull over the PDF version here. We can zoom in and really get the details of, okay, a change over time. How is this? What's the line chart? And why is this the standard way of showing that type of information? Another resource that I really love for picking that right visual is the National Building or Nationwide Building Society published a public app, a Qlik Sense app. So you can download the QVF file if you Google the Nationwide Building Society visual vocabulary. And they've published this app for us to use and see those different chart types right in Qlik Sense. So we can jump into deviations and looking at the different charts that represent deviations and what I might want to apply based on the data set that I'm working with. or if I want to hop over to ranking, which is one of the chart types we might want to make today, we can look at, do I want to use an ordered bar chart for this? Will a proportional symbol chart really help to get this information across to my audience? So really kind of taking that look and feel. I love these bump charts where we can kind of show how rankings have changed over time. So there's a lot of really great ways that you can visualize data. And I love how NBS has pulled all of this together in a Qlik Sense app.
Wow, that's wonderful. They're also a Vizlib customer, I believe, which is always nice.
Yeah, I'd love to see all of the Vizlib charts in here as well. That would be cool. So when we come into this first step of choosing our visual, we want to, again, start with identifying that data relationship. So thinking through, what's the question that I'm trying to answer? What is the relationship that data represents? So for example, if I wanted to show you, Jane, going off of our examples from last week, which states have the highest COVID case rates. So I might think about that. Okay, I'm trying to represent to you a ranking. I want to rank the states in order from the most cases this week, and prepare a visual that shows you that. So I'm going to now choose a chart type based off of that representation. And so going into ranking, looking through the different chart types that I have available to me to display that information, and again, just kind of picking it in that sense. I don't know about you, but I think that we often see this applied in the opposite sense. I have often seen examples, and not even watching somebody apply this, but seeing a visual and knowing instantly that they chose the chart type before they identified the data relationship that they were trying to show to their audience. So my favorite example of this is I love Sankeys to death. However, I think they're often just chosen because they look cool. And so I'll look at a visual and I'll immediately think, they just wanted to put a Sankey on that dashboard. And they just found all the random dimensions they could find and tried to create a flow between them. Go ahead.
Do you think this happens more when showing ranking or another, like a distribution?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that it happens when we're trying to just get fancy with our dashboards, and people, infographics have their time and place, and infographics can be very visual and very artistic. But if we are thinking about creating a business application and how we're drawing our audience's attention to information that we're displaying in a chart, I think that's the most common place, is where we're trying to make that look a little fancier by adding something in, like a Sankey, or adding in a bubble chart, and it just doesn't represent the information well, or doesn't really get anything across to our audience that they couldn't have gleaned in another way. So I don't know. Do you have any examples, Jane, of where you've seen charts applied poorly in that sense?
Oh man, have I? Well, yes, I've seen maps that are tilted. So it'll be, instead of just a flat map, it's a little bit tilted. So you can't really tell, what is what and where anything is. And usually sometimes they'll actually have like spikes on top of the map, but since it's tilted, you can't really, the depth perception's really off. I think that was one of the worst that I've seen.
Now you're getting into the sense of three-dimensional charts, which
in
a two-dimensional screen that doesn't come across very well. It can be very deceiving for our audience.
Yeah. We can ask the audience too, what is the worst chart that you've seen, and why was it so bad?
Yeah, I would love to hear some of those. So
we do have a question for you. What are your thoughts on map visuals?
Oh, I think that maps have a really good application in some sense. They can be applied really well, and they can be applied in ways that aren't very helpful, I would say. So, for example, if we are looking at data sets and you'll see like a map with bubbles all over it, those ones are maybe not super helpful. Another great example that I saw actually in one of the books that I was reading here, Better Data Visualizations, they were talking about how you can misrepresent data sets. So if you're using an area chart or an area map to represent, this was in the case of voting in the United States. And so representing votes based off of land area is not very applicable, because the votes are based off of the Electoral College and all of that's based off of populations. And so seeing a map that's color coded based off of the party that is highest represented or won by that state doesn't really showcase what actually matters in the vote, which is the number of electoral votes that they've gotten. And so it's really deceiving to the audience. So I think, again, maps, I think, are great tools, but they need to be applied thoughtfully so that they have meaning that represents well the data that they're trying to show.
What kind of chart type do you think is the most forgiving when it comes to displaying data? What do you think you can kind of get away with the most? I feel like I know what you'll say.
I'm going to go with a bar chart here. I think a bar chart can be really forgiving. It doesn't, require you to order the data in any specific way, just to display information. Yes, and we'll talk about this later, how we can, use bar charts very purposefully to get our audience's attention. But I think bar charts are super forgiving in the sense that it's not as easy to distract our audience from the information that's being displayed in the bar chart. Unless, of course, you use a stack bar, then you can just hide a bunch of data everywhere.
I think we have an answer for the worst chart. It's a chart without labels. I agree.
Yeah.
Those are bad.
and I'll counter that with a chart without labels that are needed. A lot of times I find redundancy in labels, and we'll talk about this when it comes to removing clutter. But, when you have dates across the x-axis, is it really beneficial to your audience to write the word dates below those dates? Well, we know that they're dates, they're formatted like dates. We don't need to duplicate that information for our audience. So being thoughtful with how we apply labels, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And there are ways to kind of almost recycle labels within your chart. Yeah, we can talk about all that later.
Yeah, cool. So let's move on to the next step. So we can choose our visual here, and now going into removing clutter. So I'm going to start with my best friend, the pie chart. So for anybody who has watched any episodes of Appy Hour since I've joined Vizlib, we often make some pointed jokes at how much I hate pie charts. And I am now going to explain to you why I hate them so much. So Jane and our audience, can anybody tell me which slice of this pie is the largest?
The green one.
Very fancy there, Jane. I see we have some other death to pie charters out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do have another comment. You've talked about visuals being too fancy. What's worse, a dashboard that is super boring and not appealing to the users, or a dashboard that's too fancy and may not be readable?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that if we're wrong in both sense. If we're not bringing our audience in and drawing their attention to our visualizations, we haven't done our job. But also, if we're distracting from the main point by just trying to put additional fancy backgrounds and colors all over the place, then we've also distracted them from the data. And so actually in part 3, we're going to be talking a lot about implementing design across our dashboards. And I think that'll be a great place for us to talk about that balance. So stay tuned. Come back when we're doing part 3.
I also just want to ask the audience, from a scale of 0 to Emily, how much do you hate pie charts?
Who else out there? So Jane, we never finished up this question here. You're right. One of these green slices is the biggest, but we can't tell. The reason for that is our eyes are not good at identifying the length of arcs. So it's really difficult for eyes to perceive which arc length is actually the longest, and then be able to compare the two slices of the pies to discern, is it the dark green or the light green that's the best? And so, or the biggest. And so my reason for my distaste for pie charts is that I think that it makes it incredibly difficult for our audience to get any meaningful information out of a pie chart. They're spending a lot of time looking at the pie chart to figure out those pieces that you want them to gain. So if I've given this to my audience to say, which region has the largest market share, they're spending their time trying to kind of pick apart. And unless I've given them these labels, which they're going to read the labels instead of looking at the visual anyways, they haven't really been able to glean any information out of it if I've just given them slices of a pie. So what can we do to remove some clutter? How can we, start bringing our audience's attention in the right way? Well, first, let's use the best visuals to display information. So if we want to show our audience, the ability to compare across a dimension, let's use a bar chart. Jane, can you tell which bar is the tallest when I give you this bar chart?
I think it's a close one, but west seems, the behind your little bar, if you could put height, I think behind that it says east. Yeah. Okay, yes. Yeah. I think it's west.
Yeah. And you came to that conclusion a lot faster. Even after minutes of us looking at that first pie chart, it was really like, okay, which one's the biggest? I still don't know. I need labels to figure it out. Here, you don't actually need any labels to figure out which bar is the tallest. So I've just put the same exact data into the form of a bar chart, into the form of a bar chart from a pie chart to show, how choosing the right visual is going to help us to start removing the visual clutter from our screen. So now let's talk about okay, we've picked the bar chart. This chart is much more effective at being able to compare across our dimension. Now, if we order the bar chart, Jane, is it really clear now which bar is the tallest?
Definitely, it's west.
Yes. So now we can really easily see, okay, we've got the tallest bar here first, and I can quickly, if I put in a more descriptive title, I can say, okay, the regions with the highest sales or the highest market share is in the West region, or however I want to title this to draw my audience to the conclusion I'm making by ordering these the way that I am. The last thing that I want to show is there's some really subtle things that we can do as BI developers to continue to draw focus and remove clutter. So whenever I look at I'll call it the default settings on a chart when I've added it to my visual, there are probably 3 or 4 things I immediately change. And it's almost standard across any BI tool I've ever used. So when I go in to remove clutter, I'm looking at things that are distracting my audience from information that's not meaningful to the chart that I'm displaying. So in my bar chart, these really faint grid lines, those are not helpful for my audience. They're not going to be able to figure out, maybe without a label or hovering, is this 31 or 32%? Is this 29%? Is it almost 30%? I don't know. And having those grid lines is distracting. It's not helping them to figure that out. The next thing I always look at is the size of the font on my axes and how I can kind of clean that up and remove some of that visual clutter there. So the last thing I've done here is remove that additional clutter. I've actually, one of the points that we had earlier is labels. If I'm going in and I'm labeling each bar directly and I have a super descriptive title, I'll remove axes completely because it's not helping my audience to get any more information out of the chart that I've displayed. So if I've put a label directly on the bar and I've got each label across my dimensions and my title is really descriptive, then I'm going to remove that axes. I'm going to remove those grid lines. I'm going to bump up the font sizes. I would never put a bar chart this big on a screen, so my bars would be a little bit smaller. And so removing that clutter, you can see how I've kind of walked through, all of these labels that were unnecessary, getting that down to something that really brings my audience into something that's much more focused on the main point.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the bar charts with the rounded top? Do you think that it's harder to read? Do you think it's just there for, looking good.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that's just kind of like a designer touch. I don't think it has any like meaningful purpose for the data. I probably would not use it unless I actually put the labels on the bars themselves. And my meaning behind that is kind of like you said, that rounded edge is, okay, where is it on my axes, and how does it line up? So if I am going for that kind of designer feel, I'll put those labels on. I'll make sure it's really clear to my audience. But yeah, that rounded edge, I think it's just a nice little designer touch. It can really make us go from this like really harsh feeling on the bars being very boxy to giving us something that looks a little bit cleaner for our audience. And I'd probably bring that around my entire, like once we get into designing our dashboards, like how do I draw that into other elements of my dashboard? If I had a map, how do I make that less jagged and a lot more smooth? And if I have any shape objects, bringing in those rounded edges on there too.
Good to know.
Yeah. So after we've removed clutter, the next step after removing clutter is drawing focus. So we've removed the distractions from our audience, and now we want to focus them in on the main point of our visual. So if we've got a message that, like we talked about in our first episode, what is that action that we want them to take? So how do we draw their focus into that action? So I'm going to bring us to the next spot, which is drawing focus. Jean, have you ever heard of pre-attentive attributes?
I've heard of it a little bit, but could you explain it further and kind of refresh my memory?
So, pre-attentive attributes, this is a topic that I never would have touched on. I've got an engineering background. I know numbers. I love playing with numbers, but I don't know anything about design. And so when we start getting into designing our visuals, we actually have to start talking a little bit about design concepts. And so pre-attentive attributes goes into those design concepts, and we're looking at what are ways that we can interact with the way humans digest information, visual information, and use that I'll call it to our advantage in our visualization. So pre-attentive attributes are these things that draw visual differences between different elements. So you can see across the screen, we've got things like length. We can see which items are different in length. We can use width to identify which one of these lines is the largest. We might use different shapes, colors, hues, intensities, groupings, enclosures. All of these are pre-attentive attributes that visually humans are consuming that information and creating kind of, I'll call it a box around. And so they're visually grouping those elements together. So
that's good to know. I once took a sensations and perceptions class in college, and we actually learned that humans are really good at telling when something is out of place. And they're also really good at grouping things better than computers. Like if I give you an image of like an elephant on a field, a computer, it would have a harder time kind of drawing the outline of the elephant and kind of discerning different blades of grass. But like humans are really, really good at that. And if anyone in our audience has expertise in this, we'd love to have you on to talk.
Let's talk about the psychology behind dashboard design.
Yeah, how great would that be?
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, and it's so neat. I think that these topics span so many different, backgrounds. I mean, I never thought I would be learning anything about design elements, and here we are. So how I've applied this in our charts. So taking that last visual, I'll say don't use bar charts to display percentages. That was a really bad example on that last slide. So I've actually changed it over now, and I'm using the dollar amounts for each of those regions. And what are some of the elements you see, Jane, on my visual now? Kind of pair it up with these pre-attentive attributes. Which ones do you see?
Oh, well, immediately the greens jump out at me. So instinctually, I feel like those would be grouped together. And because central and south are gray, I feel that maybe they're less important, or something that instead of them just being grouped together, I just feel that they are, less important. Maybe they don't contribute to the story as much. So my focus is on the west and the east. I also see the sales target, that line right there. And so my eyes kind of drawn, and I'm thinking, why is that important? Why is that there?
Yeah. So you immediately identified color. That is a pre-attentive attribute that I think that we often don't use to our advantage. A lot of times we are splattering color just like paint all over our dashboard screens. And so let's think about it more as a pre-attentive attribute and how we can use it to draw focus. And the second, I apply target lines or reference lines like an enclosure, like you would in an enclosure. And you might use an enclosure as well on a dashboard or visualization. But that reference line really helps to bring kind of our focus to what's important. Where's my level of importance? And so I've applied those two pre-attentive attributes to try to tell my story. So the regions that are above target, you can really easily see I've got my west and my east regions. They're above my sales target. Maybe I'd amplify this by just telling you what the numerical value of my sales target was so that you could see that. But you can really quickly tell, and especially if I had a dynamic data set going with this, as data is being updated, it would flow into this visualization and quickly change it as soon as it crosses that target line. And so it's always there to draw my audience into, no matter what the data is saying, it's drawing them to the important part of that visualization. So drawing focus using pre-attentive attributes, this can also go south pretty quickly.
Yeah, if you have too many things to color.
Which ones do you see on this chart? What are you?
Oh, okay. Oh, I see some red. Red jumps out at me.
Okay. So again, you're looking at the color.
Yeah, I see the sizes. I don't know what the sizes mean. I see a huge red and a huge pink, and it's a little bit difficult to read. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, yeah. I've got lots of colors, lots of dots, lots of things going on here. Movies. I've got a really long title. I've got a legend here that's longer than the space that I've got for it. So lots of things going on. So
I know it's a mistake that sometimes BI dashboarders make. And I know I made it when I started out. It's that you think if you put a legend, then everything's fine. You can use whatever color you want. You can do whatever you want. As long as there's a legend in there, it will be legible. And as I've kind of grown, I've learned that is not always the case. Sometimes a legend is not enough.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Jane. I would say if you're applying color in a way that doesn't require a legend, you're probably doing it right. And I feel like I'm going to make a bunch of people's eyes roll or heads turn at that statement. But I think that the best way to apply color across a dashboard or in a visualization is in a way where you don't need a legend to tell you what it means. You've got enough context throughout to really draw a story the way that you're using that color. So we'll definitely be talking about that more. All right. So very cluttered visual we have here. If we were going to draw some focus, we really have to think about why did I even make this scatter plot to begin with? What message am I trying to get across? And so if I'm trying to show my audience that just because you've got a really good audience score, it doesn't mean that you're going to make a lot of money. Then the way that I am doing that is through the scatter plot. So I've plotted the critic score against the audience score, and the size of my bubbles is showing me how much money they've made. And so all my little bubbles are up at the top here. So where I got higher audience score than critic score. And I'm making it easy for my audience to see by kind of using color to give them that visual line. In the last version, the genre didn't make any difference to the story I was trying to tell. It just distracted from the whole point that I was trying to make with my visualization. So using that color to tell them the story that I'm trying to get across is a much more effective way to, like we're saying, use pre-attentive attributes to draw focus to the story. There's a lot of other things I would change about this. I might not, try so hard to use the size. I think the size can be distracting as well, but just making that one small change can really help us to draw focus on our visualizations.
And just something I noticed is that even if you went back to the clutter tab, if you had a line in there, I feel like it would not be as clear. It would still not be as clear as if you just colored the two different parts differently.
Yeah, you're talking about drawing in a reference line here, like that 1-to-1 ratio, and then trying to say like, oh yeah, all the ones above it are not making as much money. Yeah. It's not as easy to see as like, oh wow, yeah, that big bubble is gray, and that big bubble, and that big bubble, and all these big bubbles, those are gray.
This is much more clear.
Yeah. And then maybe, instead of using a scatter plot for this, I might use a different visual if I really wanted to bring their attention more to the dollar amounts than to the scores. So there's lots of different ways that, it's really important to take these three elements of choosing the right visual based off that data relationship and removing the clutter and then drawing our focus to really help elevate our story. Yeah. So Jane, any last thoughts on these topics before we jump into kind of playing with our data set?
I guess one would be using width. What would be a really good example of using width to draw focus when making dashboards? I'm kind of running into a wall with that, just thinking about how I would apply that.
So I think that you're probably running into a wall because you're thinking about some of the standard tools that we use for visualizations. I think a really great example of how I've seen this done in an infographic would be things like instead of, just a standard bar chart, kind of like a Mecco, but using the width of the bar to represent information as well. So if we wanted to group things into like 3 sets, having 3 different bar widths that really kind of help us visually group those bars together, that would be one way of doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Awesome. Okay, that does help me a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's go into...
And to the audience, if anyone, either now or later, you have a really good way of drawing focus or, giving attention to one thing, let us know. We always want to learn and learn new tips and tricks. Maybe you think that coloring isn't the best way. We would love to hear your opinion.
Okay, so Jane, I want to go back to our topic from last week. Could you remind people what we are building a dashboard for, what data sets we have, what we talked about last week?
Of course. As people who have seen the show and kept up with the show know that I have been trying to plan a trip for the longest time. I've been trying to go somewhere. I am in Paris now, but now that I'm here, I'm missing the US, so I think I actually want to go back. And I just want to plan a nice little road trip, and I'm trying to decide on where to go. What really is important to me is COVID data, and I definitely want to see which states are the best vaccinated, which states have the most vaccinated population. I really like hiking, so I would love to see some hiking trail data in there. And I'm someone who has very expansive taste, so I also want to look at fast food restaurants and see all the different fast food restaurants around and see maybe build a chart off that, what's important to me, what has really good hiking trails, great fast food, and great vaccination rates.
Lots to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. And yeah.
Well, let's remind our audience what we looked at last week. We went in and started to explore our data. So we just started off asking questions of the data. How many cases and vaccinated people are there over the data collection period? And so we, used our ridgeline plot here to show each of the different states and started taking a look at the total number of cases and swapping it into people vaccinated. We looked at some scatter plots just to kind of take a peek at what's the percent of our population that's vaccinated versus the population with positive cases. So kind of looking at case rates and vaccination statuses. Oof, we had our pinwheel here.
Lovely pie chart, all those colors.
Looking at the states with the most fast food restaurants and where we might find the most vaccinated people, number of people. So lots of things that we started to explore in our data set last week. But we didn't care too much about choosing the right visual or making it look in a way that we can actually present to Jane, our audience. We just wanted to see what was there. What's the information that's in our data set. So let's dive into actually starting to tell a story with our data sets. So I don't know about you, Jane, but the first thing I think about when we're trying to plan a road trip is we need a map. We need a map on our dashboard to show us where we're going and what we're doing.
Yeah, we're not geography experts. I would love to know where every state is. And also for people out of the US who probably don't know where Iowa is, I think that, yeah, this would be very helpful.
Yeah. So we've got the category here. This is our spatial category. It's representing spatial information. And so, I'm thinking about our, displaying our COVID vaccinations, like, how many people are vaccinated per 100 across the states within the United States, like a quick and easy way to visualize where you might want to travel to based on, the most vaccinations. So I think that I want to use an area map for this, just allowing you to quickly pick out which states have the highest vaccination rates just based on that geography. So let's bring in a map here. And we're going to add in an area layer.
I've seen charts within a map. And when I first saw that, I thought, oh, that's kind of difficult to read and doesn't really tell me too much. I wonder what other people think of that, and also kind of what are the alternatives to putting a chart within a map.
Yeah. I'd love to hear what our audience thinks about that, putting like pie charts and bar charts on a map. I am not going to say what my opinion is. I think we can all guess. Now I want to go into my layer. So what I've done here is I've added in our locations. So we know we have United States data. I want to make sure that you can see I've got Georgia is actually over here instead of in Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
I think I can put in, yes.
And this is how the audience knows this is live and that we're doing this on the fly, is because we actually make these shorts live and you can see us kind of struggle a little bit, but that's just the process.
That's how it goes.
Charts. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. We've got Georgia back in the United States, so that's good. All right, so we can see that I've got state data within my data set. And I told you I wanted to maybe color this by I think that the people vaccinated is going to be one of the most important things to you. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think people vaccinated are important. Last week someone did mention having age groups would be great, and we also think that age groups would be great, but we haven't found readily available data that's quite very recent about the age groups and the vaccination rates. If you find them, please send it to us. That would be amazing to kind of go through. But for now, yeah, just the average vaccination of each state would be great.
Yeah, and actually, Jane, to that point of removing clutter, drawing focus, that balance. Knowing how to apply that age-based data is going to be really important. Do we apply it within the visual? Do we give it to you as a filter option? So brings up a really interesting point of, is it adding clutter to actually try to somehow add in here something that shows you visually the age group? So like, what if I put a pie chart on every state and showed you the percent of the population vaccinated by age group? Horrendous idea. Absolutely horrible. But I think in this case, if I had given you a filter and you could have easily selected your age group of interest or multiple age groups of interest, that might help you to like interact with this visual some more. Jane, is there anything about this visual? I just popped in here. It's colored based off of the people vaccinated per 100. So you can see, most people vaccinated, least people vaccinated, kind of used a color scheme that maybe shows you, okay, reds and oranges in our culture kind of have a poorer connotation than like the blues and greens. Those tend to have like a more positive connotation. So is there anything distracting to you about the way that this visual is right now?
Maybe all the colors and also the colors in the background, the green and the green of the land and the blue of the ocean. It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I think that it's really easy with maps to say, like, just be like, oh, like this is what a map looks like. But I love that we have the ability here to really kind of dive in and talk about the things that actually clutter this. So I think actually using like a different map layer to I guess
a different background. Yeah, like having a different background. Sometimes when I'm making sheet menus, I can get very carried away, and sometimes I'll throw in like really fun backgrounds. Or if I'm doing a candy one, you saw that I once put a polka dotted thing in there. It can take away from charts sometimes, and it doesn't just apply to maps. It applies to any background.
Yeah. Jane, do you remember where we can change those backgrounds?
Off the top of my head, let's dig in a little bit. Layer display, is it not there? Could you go back?
Map
settings. Appearance. There we go. No, click on base map.
Yeah, there we go.
And then.
All right, I love this. Okay, so maybe a pale background?
Yeah, pale's good because we're not really using. I think pale is nice.
You like pale?
I like pale.
I think either one of those, the pale or this dark one, really makes those colors pop and stand out to me. Yeah. But I love how both are very different from the color schemes that I'm using. They don't distract you. Like if I had used the satellite one, it gets very distracting. Yes. Having two totally different image types there. I'm going to add in a descriptive color here. People.
And a great tip that you had last week was that for titles, you actually like to ask the question that you're trying to answer within the chart, and that has stuck with me. And I really like that.
I probably won't deliver you a dashboard with a bunch of questions for titles, but turning the question into a statement is definitely a way to do that.
Yeah, because it is hard to come up with titles sometimes. We think very technically, and we're like population by blah 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 blah, and sometimes that's not the best way to go about naming a chart.
So Jean, right now I'm showing you a spatial reference point for like where in the United States do you want to drive based on those vaccination rates. But you'll notice the way that I put in the data here, I'm looking at actually the max. So this would be the max of the people vaccinated, aka the most recent data that I have for vaccinations. But I do have a lot of information in my data set about vaccinations over time and cases over time. And so a map isn't going to show us data over time. So I think that would be really great to dive into looking at something over time now.
Yeah. Love to ask the audience, what do you like to use to show different things over time? Personally, I really like line charts, but
yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. If we look back to our Financial Times reference here, change over time is most effectively, and actually they order them based off of kind of their perspective, I'll call it, of the most effective to least effective way to display that information. So they actually do put line chart right there at the top. It's the most common way to show change over time. And I really like how like a connected line, it shows you that flow. We all know that what that story looks like. So let's add in a line chart.
And sometimes when it comes to line charts, there's no magic number, but I think that for me, a good limit would be about 5 lines on a line chart. At that point, you're thinking, oh, that's too many lines. And I actually think the ridgeline plot is a great alternative to use for a way to display change over time. You can also compare and contrast with other lines, but they're not overlapping. So you're not just getting hundreds of charts just overlapping all the time, and you can't tell what's really ahead and what's really below.
Yeah, agreed. So we've got, this is our people fully vaccinated across our data set here. And I think there's a couple things that I want to do right off the bat. So let me take this out of our edit mode real quick. So Jane, what are some things that are distracting to you just in general about, I talked about it as those default settings. So what's distracting you about our default settings here?
Maybe actually the labels, because I know that October and April are dates. So maybe we don't need that label down there.
Yep. I also find the grids always bothers me. It's distracting. I'm not going to be able to know an individual data point based off that grid line. I'm using my hover over my tooltip features to be able to actually see what that value is. So I want to remove those grid lines. Anything else that really is not bringing the focus and adding clutter and distraction. I also find when I have a data set where I want you to see the trend, I love this feature, the scroll bar feature, but a lot of times I'll turn it off if I want to just look big picture at my data set.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw grids, or when I found them really helpful, was kind of during test taking. You do remember like SATs, where they'd be like, oh, which school has, or like, who sold the most apples, or who sold more than 5 apples, and you needed that grid line. But I think other than test taking purposes, I haven't really seen a grid line be that helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
And we'd love to ask the audience, what are your feelings about line chart versus area line chart? Sometimes I like to add in an area line chart just to kind of get fancy, but as we did talk about, sometimes fancy is not the best way to go, and sometimes it can be distracting, but I can't help myself.
Know what an area chart, like what application that's used for?
No, I just use it for it to look nicer, and I think it is easier to compare sometimes different lines, but no, I don't know specifically what it's used for. Is it for comparisons?
Show you. Okay, so we're down the middle here. Change over time. Notice how there's no area chart in here.
So it's not useful ever.
Do you know why?
No, tell me.
So I go back to my like mathematics training, and you always use an area chart when like the area under the curve is important. So when I have, in this instance, I have COVID vaccinations. And so I want my user to look at this data set and know like over time, the number of people getting vaccinated is increasing. Well, I don't want them to think about that and like add this day to this day to this day. So getting the area under the curve. If I was showing them the daily vaccination rates, I might think about using area under the curve, because the sum of the people who are vaccinated each day will be equivalent to the total people vaccinated.
Okay.
So you are adding an area to be fancy or to have some look and feel, but an area actually has meaning in a chart. An area means like this area is important, group it together, sum it together. That has meaning in our visualization.
So it's almost like a bar chart in a line chart. Like it serves the purpose of a bar chart and a line chart. We have a comment by Sia. Change over time. What do you think of the use of Qlik's animator feature?
Oh, have you used the animator?
No, I have not used Qlik's animator feature. Have you?
I haven't. We'll have to think about that.
Yeah, is it I'll ask Sia, is it like just an animation turning charts into an animation to see it over time? Because yeah, I definitely think that's helpful.
I've seen like I don't know if anyone has used like JMP, different statistical software tools, but where you can have like a a representation of a machine and like the tolerance of that machine, and then you can show that over time, and so like it'll literally flip through images of the same chart, but that the images each represent a different time within your series. So it's like a video chart where it's replicating that information over time. Yeah.
Okay.
That same idea, I guess. Thinks I think that would be a really neat way to show information. However, it really depends on the application. So, if I'm trying to deliver an executive dashboard, no executive is going to sit here and watch my video on the change over time. But if I've got some engineers that really want to like think and look through the details, they might sit and watch that chart and like think about how that change that has occurred over the span that my video is. They might actually find that really helpful way to kind of pinpoint issues with their compressor shaking and something else like that. Like how do we can see multiple pieces of information and then look at it over time. So definitely you need the right application, but I think it can be really helpful. Cool. Yeah. So we've got our change over time here. I think, we removed some of those grid lines. I actually took out the markers. So there was like individual dots for every single day. And that was so distracting. It didn't help what we wanted to see on our line chart. We might want to, let's do on the appearance settings, we can actually take off that scroll preview so I can just see that view over time.
Okay.
See what else could we do here. I can on my axes, we did talk about this, but like increasing font sizes, making things more legible, maybe getting rid of labels, the titles that don't have much meaning. So we already know that's a date, like you said. So why do we need the duplicative information? But maybe on that left axis, we might want that reference of the people fully vaccinated there. So I'll leave that in. And bump up my font sizes again there.
Yeah, that's much more legible.
Cool. I want to add in, and put in on my side screen over here, a calculation so we can get our 7-day average. I think that would be a really neat piece of information to overlay on top of our case data. So let me add that in quick.
Okay. Yes, that would. I was just thinking about animated graphs, and yeah. I actually see on Reddit a lot. There's a thread called Data is Beautiful. They love animated pie charts where you can see kind of just the change in the different slices. How would you feel about that? No, I can see it on your face. Emily's thinking, no, don't like pie charts, wouldn't like them animated.
I'd have to see the use case. I would say, I mean, if your pie chart only has, 2 series in the dimension, I could get behind that. It would kind of look like a clock movement. I could get behind that.
See the different slices change.
Yeah. But if there's more than 2 and you're animating it, don't do that.
I see animated bar charts a lot. I think those are really cool. I will definitely need to check out the Qlik's animated feature. That sounds like something really, really neat.
Yeah. So Jean, there is one other thing that I think we really need to add into our line chart. last week we talked a lot about adding context or understanding our context, really. And for me, a line chart is a really, really great way to add in context, particularly when you have events over time and you want your audience to know how that event impacts the data set. So I think that it would be really great place for us here to add in a reference object. We can add in annotations that tell us more information about our visualization, such as maybe when vaccines were becoming fully, widely available to our users.
Yeah, I think, that would be really helpful. I can't quite remember the date. So having that on here without me having to go look into my table or go look up something. That would be very helpful. And annotations are nice because it helps you easily look at your data. I think that's something we often talk about is how can you get the most from your data very quickly, I think. Instead of having to, a good chart doesn't make you, a good chart allows you to reach a conclusion pretty quickly. If you need to stare at it and you need to compare it to other charts and you need to spend 30 minutes on something, I don't think that means that it's a very good chart.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So I'm adding in like vaccine widely available. And so we can really see, okay, like as you're digesting this information, maybe you're interacting and filtering the data, you're going to be able to see where that change occurs and how it impacts our data set. Add in a description. Maybe I'll put in the date, April.
Yeah, and if anyone's watching that likes to use annotations, you can actually throw emojis in there. So that's a little cool tip.
Ooh, I've never done that. I don't know. I would do it with a business app, but maybe for you, Jane, I'll add in
a fun app.
Yeah. Cool. I see that we're running low on time, but Jane, I'd love to talk about one more example before we hop off for today.
Yes, let's do that.
So kind of prior to our chat today, I planned out one more looking at ranking. And I did actually add in some visual techniques like you were talking about of the rounded edges on my bars. And so, looking at ranking as a way of showing our information, I think that bar charts or column charts are really effective at getting that information across. We talked about how you can really perceive that the length of the line a lot easier than the length of an arc. And so ordering my states here based off of the number of fast food restaurants, or I'll say unique or different fast food restaurants, so that you can quickly find, Jane, like which states have the most options late at night when you're trying to find some food on your road trip.
Perfect.
Yeah. And another cool way might be like within a table. I've left it actually in this example, I've left in the scroll feature. A lot of times we'll do something like creating a bar chart with the top 10. And what you've done is you've actually hidden data from your audience. You said, okay, everything except the top 10 is what I want you to look at. But what if they were trying to dig into some of those states that weren't part of the top 10? You've hidden that from them. Right. And so I like to make some dynamic sets and then provide the information in maybe a secretive way. So I think the scroll bar is a really neat way to do that. I set this, the first display to be the top 10. And then I've given my audience the ability to scroll through and look at other states. Another way that you can do it is by, creating dynamic sets. So you do this a lot in Tableau, but you can also do it within Qlik Sense, creating a variable for the number of the top states that you want to look at. And for this one, I'm doing it based on the number of hikes that they have. And so I can adjust that number. And I've created just two sets. The first one being my top states, and then the second one being not my top states. So using that data in a pivot table, I can hide from you or remove that from the initial view. So I'm not distracting you from those other states.
Removing the clutter.
Give in the information so that when you do get to a point where you really want to dig into those other states, you can open it up and still find them. So I think there's some really creative ways when we're looking at ranking how we can apply that. And I know we're at the end of our time here, Jean, but kind of just want to summarize what we've talked about today. You know, a lot of getting into dashboarding and building out visuals. You'll see we did not create a dashboard yet. We're in round 3 and we still haven't made a dashboard. So we're really talking about getting to know our data and now telling the story within each individual visualization. And so focusing in our audience on the message that we're trying to get across, removing the clutter from that display, and drawing them in to actually tell a story with our data. So next round here, we'll be talking about actually implementing that into a dashboard design.
Okay, awesome. Can't wait. And this just goes to show how much thought needs to be put in before you start just making a dashboard. It's really important to do some kind of homework beforehand.
Yeah. It's our homework before we deliver our final report.
Awesome. Thank you for such a great Appy Hour. I love learning about how to let my data do the talking. Cheers to a great Appy Hour.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right, and I will see you at our next Let Your Data Do the Talking episode. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.